Question is that the bill be now read the second time. The honourable member for Nelson.
Thank you, Mr President. Cats make wonderful pets and provide a great deal of joy and comfort to their owners. However, they are also excellent hunters, host to harmful cat-borne parasites, and, when uncontrolled, they're a source of community nuisance. Amending the Cat Management Act 2009 provides an invaluable opportunity to create a comprehensive and effective regulatory framework for cat management in Tasmania, a framework that applies across the state and builds consistency across all municipalities. This bill goes quite some way to improving cat management effectiveness, and I welcome key aspects of the bill. Compulsory microchipping and desexing of all non-exempt breeding cats is very welcome, as is the requirement that all cats sold must be desexed prior to change of ownership. These requirements of responsible cat ownership will help to reduce the number of cats, and in particular the number of unwanted cats and kittens that end up as strays or feral cats. Domestic cats, poorly managed, are a source of all stray and feral cats, as we would note. Preventing uncontrolled breeding of cats and stopping people giving away undesexed kittens will also ultimately impact on reducing the feral and stray cat numbers and reducing the negative impact that these predators are having on our environment. They're very welcome. It's very welcome progress on those fronts. And while the bill will not mitigate issues with existing feral cats, it will go some way towards reducing the number of cats that join them, which is a very good outcome. In this bill, Mr President, clarity on the number of cats allowed per household is very beneficial. I understand that complaints about multiple cats on a single property are a common issue for councils, and so limiting households to 4 cats without a permit will support councils in managing these complaints. It will also reduce the health problems that can present to owners, the animal welfare concerns that can be associated with multiple cats, and the nuisance issues that sometimes are caused by excessive cat numbers on properties. Landowners too will benefit from the changes to the protection of primary production and private property from cats. Roaming domestic cats in Australia have been found to roam on average from 1 hectare up to 31 hectares over several days. Being able to trap and seize, and in the case of primary producers, humanely destroy roaming cats on their property will assist property owners in undertaking cat management actions on their land, and I welcome that. However, while landowners have some redress with regard to problem cats on their property, cat owners are still not held responsible for allowing their cats to roam beyond their premises. The onus appears to be on the rest of the community to protect their property and their wildlife and their domestic property and other animals from roaming cats. I note that the amended Cat Management Act is just a component of a comprehensive cat management program, which includes the Cat Management Plan 2017 to 2022. Included in this plan is the 3 regional cat management coordinators and the rather entertaining and informative Tassie Cat website. These are excellent initiatives. State and local governments agree more education with a greater focus on responsible cat ownership principles is necessary to increase the community awareness and understanding on these range of matters. It absolutely underpins as a foundation to all efforts. An understanding of responsible cat ownership and all that entails is vital when it comes to cat management, and I congratulate the entire Tasmanian Cat Management Reference Group and the 102 individuals and groups who made public submissions and that contributed to the Tasmanian Cat Management Plan. Mr President, as good as many aspects of this bill are, it does not go far enough, in my view. It falls short on the issue of containment, and in doing so will continue a situation of frustration among community members and property owners who are currently impacted by roaming cats, and also of considerable preventable destruction of native wildlife, including in specially reserved places. The bill does not require cat owners to ensure their cat is contained and not roaming. This is the single thing that would most significantly reduce the problems that cats cause in our communities. Currently, a cat is not required by law to be secured or restrained or prevented from being on a property without the consent of the property owner, the manager or the occupier. This bill, as it currently stands, does nothing to progress that substantially, and that's disappointing. research clearly highlights that community education alone, while highly important, but alone it's not enough to motivate all cat owners to keep their cats at home. Mr President, we know in very many areas of our lives it's not enough to set a rule or a requirement and expect that people will comply with it simply because they've been educated to understand why that rule is there. We know that realistically there are many instances in which a consequence is needed to motivate compliance with a rule or requirement and to change behaviour in a way that can be relied upon. There are many benefits to effective cat containment. Not only would our native wildlife be protected, but so would our much-loved pet cats. For instance, too many loved cats are run over on our roads. Containment would prevent this. Cats at large often get into fights. I know that personally. I've had cats that have been frequent fighters. They get in fights with other cats, they get in fights with native wildlife, and that often results in infected wounds that can be potentially life-threatening and rather unpleasant to deal with, if I must say so, and expensive.
Yes.
I don't know if people are aware that when cats have wounds, you have to keep the wound open for it to heal well, which involves rather unpleasant arrangements.
You do need to keep them inside while that's happening.
Indeed.
Yes.
Contained cats have much less chance of contracting feline AIDS or toxoplasmosis, nor do they unwittingly spread diseases to native animals and to livestock. Mr President, importantly for neighbourhood relationships and cohesion, contained cats do not wander onto a neighbour's property, causing nuisance or damage and the potential for neighbourhood disputes. When cats are contained, owners never have to worry about where their cat is and whether it's safe and whether it will be coming home that night. Roaming cats are a real problem. Recent Australian research, in fact just from this year, reviewed 66 studies on predation rates by pet cats, so not strays or ferals, but pet cats, to estimate the predation toll across Australia. They estimated that 390 million animals are killed by domestic cats annually, 241 million of which are native. That's including small mammals, birds, lizards, insects and frogs. On average, this research found, a roaming pet cat kills 186 mammals, birds and reptiles each year, including 115 native animals. Because pet cats live at much higher densities than feral cats, their predation rate per kilometre squared in residential areas is actually 28 to 52 times larger than the predation rates by feral cats in natural environments. It's domestic cats, it's our pet cats that are the biggest killers, but only because we allow them to be so. The research that I've just spoken about concluded that pet cats are capable of driving declines in local populations of native wildlife species. A key recommendation was that cat prohibition should be considered in new residential developments that are close to areas of high conservation significance because of the fact that they drive declines and have the capacity to drive declines in the native wildlife species in sensitive areas particularly. Based on these predation rates, Mr President, it's estimated that at least 627,100 native animals are killed in the Kingborough municipality each year from domestic cats alone. This municipality is of interest to me because my electorate of Nelson, the southern part of my electorate, encapsulates the northern part of the Kingborough municipality. So it's a highly local issue for me and my constituents, and one that I'm very keen to see a better result on. Cats also spread the disease toxoplasmosis, which is fatal to a number of Australian herbivores, including bandicoots, wombats, possums, wallabies, and also birds such as forest ravens. I'm sad to relate that in Kingborough, an entire family of little penguins was killed in recent times by a roaming cat. A cat, not a feral cat, but thought to be a roaming domestic cat. Although the council knew who the cat's owners was, they were unable to take any effective action against that owner under current legislation. Compare this, Mr President, to the consequences that we have recently seen put in place to protect little penguins from dog attacks, where we've certainly acted decisively to ensure that that form of domestic pet is either not able to, or if it does, is penalised, the owners are penalised effectively for that kind of predation. There's another reason that roaming cats are a real problem, Mr President, and that's the disease that they can carry. As wonderful as cats are as pets, it's estimated that 30 to 40% of domestic cats worldwide carry toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis and I'm going to have trouble saying that. Sarcocytosis. Cytosis, there you go. Yeah. Sarcocytosis. Along with other cat-borne diseases are a risk to humans and a costly problem for livestock production in Tasmania. And they can be spread by cats to livestock if the livestock consume feed or water that's been contaminated by the infected cat faeces. Toxoplasmosis, the disease caused by a parasite T. gondii, causes abortion in sheep, goats and pigs and defects in their offspring. Young pigs can also get quite sick from the disease. There are two species of cystitis,
I think it's
cystis, by the look of it, sarcocystis,
Sisters, I think.
that are spread to sheep in Tasmania, one via cats and the other via dogs. However, only the species spread by cats creates macroscopic cysts in the muscle tissue of sheep. They look like grains of rice, Mr President, and causing that meat to be condemned. While most common in stray or feral cats, all cats can contract the parasites, especially if they do roam and they eat prey or scavenge. The greatest impact on stock tends to occur on properties that border rural townships. So common in Tasmania, in fact, where numbers of feral cats are greatest. But all farms are at risk, as any cat that roams and scavenges can contract and spread the parasite. Prevalence of these parasites among sheep is higher in Tasmania than on the mainland, due to Tasmania's moist climate and high densities of domestic and feral cats on many sheep properties. This leads to the accumulation and persistence of the parasites oocysts on pasture. Records indicate that both these parasites significantly impact on sheep production in Tasmania. Up to 40% meat losses due to the presence of sarcocysts in meat have been recorded, and recent monitoring at a Tasmanian abattoir detected sarcocysts in 13.7% of the carcasses. Data from Animal Health Australia detected sarcocysts in approximately 6 to 21% of Tasmanian adult sheep carcasses. One property that ran ewes in a small town in Tasmania had 118 of 354 sheep condemned. That's a fairly high proportion of the flock. While recent prevalence data for T. gondii is not available, a 1974 Tasmanian study found 62% of ewes tested positive. That's rather out of date, but I think it gives us an indication that it can be quite significant. Up to game meats, including kangaroo and wallaby, can also be sources of T. gondii cysts, but toxoplasmosis can thus adversely impact on the game meat industry if that meat is not stored and cooked appropriately. The TFGA, the Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers Association, in its submission in July this year to the House of Representatives Standing Committee on the Environment and Energy Inquiry into the problem of feral and domestic cats in Australia, reports that stock losses due to toxoplasmosis and sarcocystis are a significant problem for farmers and a real barrier for Tasmania to be able to reach the $10 billion target for agricultural production. However, Tasmania has no routine sheep or game meat health monitoring program, so the real impact of these parasites and their associated diseases is not known, and farmers may not be aware that their stock is contaminated. An assessment on Kangaroo Island in South Australia that we can look to as an example found the annual cost to that island's sheep graziers due to lost meat production from sarcocystis alone was between $2 to $4 million. Mr President, there's a third way in which roaming cats are a real problem. Public nuisance. Roaming domestic cats create significant public nuisance and community discord. Approximately 43% of community complaints received each year by Kingborough Council's Cat Management Officer relate to nuisance caused by roaming domestic cats. Roaming cats disturb other domestic cats and dogs. They defecate in neighbours' yards. They fight with and kill neighbours' pets and local wildlife. They spread toxoplasmosis to wildlife, to livestock and to humans. And they cause breakdown in neighbour relations. The lack of recourse for those neighbours affected by roaming cats is an ongoing cause of community discord. And in fact, in relation to this bill, I've had numerous contacts from community members who actually find this topic highly distressing, and it's a real problem in their lives to have roaming neighbourhood cats affecting their lives and their property. Mr President, under current arrangements and even under the improved amendments in this bill as presented, they leave all the responsibility and effort on the shoulders of those who are being impacted, those whose property is being damaged, those whose property is being invaded by roaming cats. It's the neighbour whose yard the cat roams into that must go to the expense and effort of trapping or seizing that cat which roams in their yard. That neighbour continues to be imposed upon for the effort and possible expense to either return the cat to the owner, if the owner's known, or to take the cat to a cat facility. All in that neighbour's knowledge that they could have to do that all over again tomorrow, and that there's no penalty available for the owner of that cat, and no requirement that that owner actually take responsibility for their pet. It's like Groundhog Day for some neighbours, Mr President, and it comes with damage, with mess, with loss of life for wildlife that may frequent the garden and be a source of pleasure, and even a loss of life for other much-loved pets. I've had numerous reports in the course of consulting on this bill of loss of pets, such as pet rabbits in backyards to roaming cats. That detriment of roaming cats is very clear. It's not in question. What we need to ask ourselves is, how does that balance against the drawbacks that may be presented by implementing compulsory containment, or providing a legal framework, at least in this first instance, for compulsory containment? The government's view is that the Tasmanian community, including local councils, are not ready and not willing to accept compulsory containment of cats. However, Mr President, when I look at the available evidence, I find this to be a claim that is not supported. Looking at what we know about community sentiment in recent years, I've found that a 2013 Kingborough Council community survey of 406 people about responsible cat ownership found that at least 84% of respondents supported restrictions on roaming cats. Of the cat owners surveyed, they made up about a quarter of the people overall who were surveyed. 45% already contained their cats, at least to some extent. In 2015-16, the Kingborough Council again surveyed Bruny Island residents and ratepayers and found that 81% of people surveyed were in favour of cat containment, and 44% of the cat owners already to some extent contained their cats. A 2016 survey of 1,462 Tasmanians, of which nearly two-thirds were cat owners, was undertaken by the Tasmanian Conservation Trust. That survey found that 62% of all respondents supported compulsory containment of cats to owners' property. Remembering two-thirds of those respondents were cat owners. Of the cat owners surveyed in that survey, 48% of them already contained their cats to some degree. A 2019 survey by the Tasmanian Cat Management Project, a statewide joint initiative, as we've heard, to support the implementation of the Tasmanian Cat Management Plan, surveyed 344 people across the state, including 148 cat owners amongst that 344. The survey found that 47% of respondents said roaming cats are a nuisance in their neighbourhood, so they have a personal experience of that nuisance, and 78% supported compulsory containment. That was the state government's own survey. Of the cat owners in that survey, 42% reported that they already keep their cats on their property at all times, and 35%, a further 35%, said they kept them contained at night. The TFGA, the Tasmania Farmers and Graziers Association, also surveyed its members and found over 95% were very supportive of compulsory desexing and microchipping, and an 80% of the members agreed for the need for cat containment. I think, Mr. President, that the claim that the community does not support this is a rather hollow one. What I think is that the message is quite loud and clear. This data demonstrates there's a strong community support for compulsory containment of cats and a high community understanding of the benefit that would ensue. Rather, what's missing is regulation catching up to community sentiment and providing the incentive and appropriate support to make it happen. Without a penalty for breaches, there's a limited compliance and no incentive for cat owners to manage their cat's behaviour fully. Without legislative support, councils, groups with that direct interest in cat management and conservation groups and communities themselves face an uphill battle to increase cat containment in the community through education alone. Mr. President, cost is often put forward as a drawback for compulsory containment. Arguments put forward cite cost as a reason not to include compulsory containment in this bill. It's claimed there would be significant costs associated with compulsory containment and complex challenges relating to statewide enforcement. Mr. President, it's rather plain fact that pets actually are expensive. There are costs associated with them. Anybody who has a pet, I think, would vouch for that. We know that pets require regular trips to the vet. We know that pets require regular care and attention. They require food. They sometimes require equipment. They sometimes require adjustments to our homes. The responsibility for pets is one that owners accept when they get them, and it is an ongoing responsibility for the lifetime of that pet. If the regulations are clear and adequate time is given for transition, people will accept appropriate containment of cats as a cost of ownership, along with compulsorily microchipping and desexing, just as we have already required with this bill. Also argued is the cost to local governments that carry out compliance under the Cat Management Act. The Honourable Leader made it very clear. Councils, in the second reading speech, the Honourable Leader made it very clear. Councils can choose to enforce all, some or none of the Act. This is the Act. Councils can choose to enforce all, some or none of the Act according to their resources and in response to their community's needs. Councils would have no obligation, for example, to police at-large cats. Individual councils determine their priorities under the Cat Management Act. However, councils wishing to would have from containment, if it was regulated, would have clear powers and appropriate penalties to effectively act. Regulating compulsory containment would also mean that councils will not have to use limited resources to develop and enforce their own bylaws, and their cat management program could be readily adapted and changed in line with the need and resources and the community support and attitude that they find in their local area. And I think it's important, Mr. President, to also consider in contrast the cost that is now being borne of not regulating to contain cats. I've already spoken on the costs to primary producers through some of those impacts from disease. I've talked about the cost to wildlife in terms of wildlife loss in our general community and in our sensitive areas. There's also the cost to property in terms of property damage and the cost in terms of community and neighbourhood harmony. I've spoken about the personal cost to families dealing with untimely loss of loved pets through road accidents and cat fights. These combined costs, this quantum of costs that we are experiencing now in the absence of regulation in terms of containment, are significant, Mr. President, and I would contend that they outweigh the total societal costs of confinement, both materially and also ethically. As a result of this, Mr. President, I'll be moving some amendments to this bill in the committee stage, if it goes through to the committee stage. And I'd like to acknowledge the leadership and the work over many years of Kingborough Council, who has worked with me in relation to these amendments and provided much valuable input. It's the work and the leadership shown by Kingborough Council and their experience that they've gained through their processes so far that's informed the amendments. I have a set of amendments that are short and to the point. Firstly, there's going to be a set of small amendments that are really very focused into councils, and they relate to cat protected areas, cat prohibited areas and cat management areas. Neither the current Act nor the proposed amendments in this bill as presented include penalties when owners of cats allow their cat to enter a cat prohibited area or who do not follow measures associated with a cat management area. I'm moving some amendments that would allow for penalties to be applied for these actions when an owner allows their cat to enter a prohibited area or doesn't comply with measures in a cat management area. At the moment, councils can only trap, seize or humanely destroy a cat found in a cat prohibited area, and then either return it to the owner or take it to a cat management facility. And even if the council has evidence of where the cat resides, the council can only seize the cat and return it or humanely destroy it. They can't actually deter the owner from allowing that to happen again for the cat to be in the prohibited area. And that's why I'm going to be moving an amendment that does set a reasonable penalty for an owner allowing their cat to enter a cat protected area, or for a person not complying with the measures of a declared cat management area, allowing their cat to go against those measures. At the moment, the lack of such a penalty has been an ongoing issue, certainly for the Kingborough Council. In Kingborough, the Boronia Beach cat prohibited area, for example, the council there has failed to trap a cat that has been entering that cat protected area for years. There are photos of that particular cat on remote camera walking around the trap that is put there.
I think his name's Blackie.
There you go, Blackie. And we, in fact, saw pictures of this
That
cat
needs to be hidden better.
in our briefing. At the moment, there is no deterrent for that cat owner of that repeat offender in that prohibited area. And to just emphasise, that prohibited area is a cat prohibited area because it has highly sensitive wildlife in it. There's no deterrent for the cat owner. It's a very time-consuming, frustrating and costly exercise for the council. And certainly it's a highly damaging circumstance for the native wildlife in that area. Being able to say, for the council to be able to say to that cat owner, for a cat entering a cat prohibited area, it's now a finable offence, and you'll be incurring a maximum penalty for that offence. So, how about you keep your animal at home? Just to have that small stick to bring to bear, alongside the education that's already been applied for many years, will allow the council to respond so much more effectively. In fact, the effectiveness of having a stick, to some extent, to incentivise compliance has been demonstrated already. The Kingborough Council has noted that they have seen a reduction in instances of people giving away undesexed kittens because there's now a penalty applied to that, and that can be pointed out to people and used as part of and alongside education to help incentivise compliance. Again, in my community, in the Kingborough area, the Kingborough Council could use the requirements that are proposed in the amendments I'll put and their associated penalties that go with them. They could use those in the case of roaming cats in the vicinity of other sensitive areas such as the Petermurrell Reserve and the adjacent council reserves, Coffee Creek, Algona and Huntingfield Avenue reserves. These reserves are home to many birds and mammal species, including threatened species, and those species are at high risk from predation from and diseases spread by cats. Monitoring in the reserves has consistently identified many domestic cats, particularly close to areas of dense housing. the council would undertake the necessary community education before embarking on enforcing this provision, and again require evidence from a complainant before they could take action under it. But importantly, the council can use the provision to help educate the public and encourage responsible pet cat ownership, and in an area of such high conservation value. And as I said, councils will not automatically have to manage cats or be obligated to carry out compliance work for which they don't have the resources. Those particular amendments just provide the council with the option to act if and when it's relevant to do so in relation to those cat protection prohibited areas and cat management areas. The other amendment that I'll be moving, that I'll just mention briefly, is a broader one, and it's to do with compulsory containment. And that's going to mean that people will need to make sure that their cat is not in public areas or on private areas that don't belong to them and not under effective control. That's effectively what it is. It doesn't dictate how people go about that. It just means that there would be a consequence if cats roamed. This will again sit alongside education. It sits there as an opportunity for councils, where relevant, to pick it up and use it as a consistent statewide understanding of how such things could be responded to. Councils will not be obligated to go out and in some active way enforce such a provision, and we'll talk about that more, no doubt, when if I have the opportunity to bring the amendment. The amendment does not mean that councils will be out patrolling the streets in vans, picking up cats willy-nilly off the streets. I think of this in some ways as not being a requirement that would mean councils have to be out actively enforcing. It provides a way to respond when an issue or a problem has been identified, when a complaint has been made. And I think that's a lot of the time that's the way we establish rules and consequences to breaking rules in our community. We don't actively go out there and make sure everyone's following it. What we do is, when it's identified that someone has broken that rule, we respond then with the penalty, or with at least interaction around the fact that there's a penalty there and perhaps the person would like to change their behaviour. And I think there's one, to provide just one example, it's not particularly similar, but I think it represents the principle. We set speed limits on our roads. It doesn't mean that we have police on every road making sure every driver is driving that limit and no more. We don't do that. We are all out driving every day and no one is checking or enforcing that we are following the speed limit. But what we do is put measures in place to be able to identify times at which people might not be following the speed limit. We have speed limit checks in relation to particular areas or particular circumstances. We check in on it when there's an issue, and we respond then with a penalty or a consequence. So enforcement of a regulation such as this isn't about intensive and resource-intensive, time-consuming and really forceful enforcement that imposes something. It's about having an opportunity to respond. It's about people understanding there's a consequence, and it goes alongside education and understanding and provides just that avenue for response. So that's what I'd like to encourage people to think about when we're talking about this. And when they hear comments about the enormous cost of enforcement and things like that, it actually doesn't have to be that. It can be a modest cost of enforcement that's used as a response by those councils who choose to, in circumstances that they've deemed locally relevant. I think that these amendments will offer additional tools, and they'll be available to us to prevent situations that we've seen occurring and that will continue to occur even when this bill, with the many good things it contains, is put in place. Things like that little penguin colony and the destruction that was caused there. Things like the property damage that's caused, or the livestock disease that's spread. The proposed amendments allow councils to participate in enforcement or phase in enforcement even as their resources and commitment permit. It may be that a council decides they currently don't have the dedicated resources to address particular sorts of cat complaints, but in 2 years' time they may be in a position to do so, and establishing an opportunity in this legislation allows for that to happen where relevant. Mr President, I'm well aware that individual councils have the ability to make bylaws to enable local cat management action. That's certainly true. But what we do need to understand, and what many here who've got local government experience would be well aware of, developing bylaws is a resource and time-intensive process. It requires considerable resourcing to develop and enforce and to develop and put in place bylaws, and then it can create an unrealistic community expectation as a result. Certainly in Kingborough Council's experience, the development of their Bruny Island cat bylaw was only possible because Kingborough chose to make it a priority, had a dedicated cat management officer and external funding support. It still also took, the process itself took over 5 years. It involved significant community consultation, reporting to the council, development of an implementation plan and supporting policies and procedures, securing grants and partnerships to facilitate compliance and enable implementation. It's onerous and it's costly, particularly for smaller councils. In addition, as we can see, if we look to South Australia, different bylaws across different communities can lead to inconsistencies and confusion in the community. Simple changes to this legislation would readily empower councils to act when and where appropriate within their resource capacity and in a way that effectively builds their confidence in cat management. And I think that's the responsibility of state government to provide that opportunity, that foundation in this legislation that can then be picked up and, where relevant and where appropriate, applied and used as a resource in those local communities. It's a way to support local government. So, Mr President, I very much support this bill and many of the measures in it, which are excellent progress towards a more integrated and effective cat management in this state. And I'll be asking members to consider and support amendments, if we get to committee stage, that will just allow that to be somewhat more effective and able to be applied well in local areas.
Question is the bill we read the second time. The honourable member for Launceston.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, look, pets are wonderful companions and I like cats, but we need to be clear they are expensive, they are hard work and they can be great responsibility. For many cat owners, the joy of their little companion